Welcome to Scrum Byte. Today we are going to talk about the change management process, one of the most important aspects of IT service management. Let's get into it a little bit in detail. For this particular video, let us look at what are the important aspects. So let's set the purpose and the scope. So basically it is like setting a standardized method for effective handling of all IT services. One of the things that you need to remember is that change is the most constant thing that happens, and we have to make sure that all changes that are there in the configuration management system has to be optimized so that there is a minimum business risk. And in this particular video, we are going to be talking about all the changes to service assets and configuration items. So this also includes integration with ITIL 4 practices and continuous process maturity assessment, which you need to conduct periodically. Now let us look at some of the key definitions that describe what is involved in change management. First thing is you need to understand what's a configuration item. So any kind of a component, it can be a software, it can be a service, it can be a physical asset, anything that can be configurable is a configuration item. One of the most important things for in change management is the creation of a RFC. RFC is nothing but a request for change. So when there is a formal request, so this has to include a lot of parameters, description, which components are affected, what is the specific business need, cost estimate, who are the resources, what kind of risk are we taking by making changes. So these are all defined in the RFC. The next one is the service asset. So any resource that is capable of contributing to a service delivery. This includes management, process, knowledge, people, infrastructure, everything. So these are the service assets which are going to be part of the change. And the change initiator, the person who actually wants to initiate the change. So it can be anybody. It can be the user, or it can be a developer who has discovered that there is something that needs to happen that is changing, or maybe there is a change in the business which is going to affect the overall process of your organization. So we need to figure out who that change initiator is. So these are the key definitions. Once we understand what are the key definitions, let us look into the next aspect. What are advisory boards? The first one is what is called as a change advisory board. It's nothing but a group of people who have been designated by the organization, and they come from various departments, different subject area matter experts. So it can be somebody from purchase, somebody from sales, somebody from IT, somebody from infrastructure, so forth. So they're all the people who are going to finally make a decision whether a change needs to happen or not. So such kind of a grouping of people are nothing but, it's called as a change advisory board. There's another kind of an advisory board which is called as the emergency CAB. This is nothing but a subset of it, but here what happens is there is a higher level of requirement for a change. So it's something that just cannot wait, and it requires an immediate rapid response. So it meets on a short notice, like there is something that has happened that has crashed the system and you have to make a change, and it has to be approved. Somebody has to take responsibility. So this specific group, which is called as the emergency CAB, will take that responsibility. And here they don't concentrate on trying to do the documentation and other things immediately. They have to investigate the system, but the key thing is that to ensure that the system is up and running and the changes happened Now that we understand what are advisory boards, let us also look into very specific responsibilities which are part of the change management team. So the first person that comes into mind is obviously the change manager. And like in different ITSM processes, this is one of the person who is going to be in charge for the whole thing which is actually related to change. So what does he do? He will receive, he will log it, and he will understand how to prioritize all the RFCs that are coming in. So there are different people who will come and suggest, hey, we need this change, and they will submit an RFC. This is the reason why we require this change. And the change manager's responsibility is to prioritize the RFCs. He will coordinate the meetings. He will table the RFCs, he will table the CAB meetings, he will issue the agendas, and also organize the ECAB meetings for emergencies. So he is also the person who is chairing the meetings and authorize acceptable changes after the advice of the CAB and the ECAB. The most important thing is obviously coordinating the implementation of the change. So he will actually liaise with the different persons, the different teams. He will plan, he'll make sure that it is built, it is tested, and it is implemented. And ultimately, he will also review the changes, analyzes the trends, and produce all kinds of management reports which needs to be sent up to the higher ups, in terms of, how much has this cost, so that you can learn lessons next time when you are trying to implement a change. Even though the change manager has got the ultimate say and he is the person in charge, it is very important to understand that he cannot be the only person who is having all the responsibilities. So what happens is, one of the things that you do is, you have what is called as a change authority level. So this is nothing but trying to formalize the authorization, based upon the type of the change, the size of the change, the risk of the change. So it goes beyond just what a change manager alone can decide, because finance will be informed sometimes, and it may be requiring an immediate authorization of budget of several $100,000, which obviously the change manager alone cannot do. So for this kind of a thing, we need to have some kind of an authority level. So depending upon the type of assessment that has been made on the RFC, you will evaluate the nature and the category and the proposed change. So if it is something low level, he can take a decision. There is basically a very significant input that comes from risk analysis. Oh, okay, what's the risk if we are going to do this? Are somebody going to be happy? Somebody is going to be unhappy? Is our sales going to go down because of this? What is the impact, of the business in the overall system? And then obviously it is going to be the scope of the change that you are going to undertake. So what happens is, you may not want to go for a full change. For example, it may be costing too much, so you may go for a partial change or something like that. So these are what is called as a change authority level. So, it's kind of, it can be the manager, change manager, it can be a combination of a change manager plus finance manager plus some other vice president of sales or something like that. Now, let us look into what are the inputs and outputs for change management. So these are the different inputs and outputs. A request for change, which we talked about. We need to understand the configuration management system. We need the change schedule. What is the schedule for the changes? When are we going to do that? The test results and the evaluation reports. When is the change going to be complete, and what is going to be the release policies? You might have done part of the change and you want to make a release. So you may say that this release I will do it in 3 days because it's an emergency fix, and I will do the next part of it in another 5 days or 10 days. So these are release policies. And then actually what is the transition and deployment plan? So once you make the change, you deploy it, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to communicate to everybody, right? Whether it requires additional training to understand the cause of that specific change, etc. So these are all the different types of inputs. And what are the outputs? So obviously you are going to get an RFC, but then there is no need that it has to be always accepted. Sometimes it will be approved, sometimes it will be rejected. And you're going to figure out of this whole RFC what happens. Are we going to have a new configuration items, and are there going to be changed configuration items, or whatever it is, and what is the updated schedule of changes. And then you also have to kind of keep documentation of all kinds of CAB and ECAB meetings, because any RFC that has to be implemented requires the permission of a CAB or a ECAB, and ultimately all these things lead to some kind of a management information system, wherein over a period of time, maybe you meet once a month, once in 3 months, and then decide that we need to take a direction which is more reflective of how the company has to perform in the future. Now that you understand the inputs and outputs, let us look at how a typical process flow diagram looks like, and this is for a generic change. So I'm going to put out this specific diagram out here which talks about the generic change management process, and I would like you to pause this video at this stage and actually go over what this whole diagram is about. It's a little detailed, but it actually talks about the entire flow of the change management process. So here are all the requirements, like change in strategies, new services or change to be made, changes from service operations, service improvement plans, etc. All these things lead to some kind of an RFC. You have to record the RFC, you have to review the RFC, then you have to make decisions. That's what this whole flow is all about. And basically, depending upon the change kind of categorization in the RFC, you will go for a standard change management or you will go for emergency change management. But this is in general how the generic change management process operates. And here, if you notice, we are going to work with other kinds of processes which are part of ITSM, like release and deployment management, like incident management, like problem management, etc. So these are all very important for you to understand in the overall process. So this is the entire process flow for generic change management. So please pause it and have a look at it, and this is something that you can refer to constantly. So these are the initial change steps, So let's go over the process a little bit more in detail. So first you create the RFC, somebody does that. You review the RFC, that is the change manager is actually filtering out the RFCs, what are impractical or if it is duplicate, etc., stuff like that. Then you categorize the RFC, whether it's a standard generic one, it's a normal, or it's an emergency, what type is it? And then apart from all these things, you are going to attach some kind of a priority to this. So is it something that is emergency that needs immediate response, or is it something that can take 3-4 days or 5 days and it can be taken care of? So these decisions are first done here by the initial change process steps. So now that you have figured out what is the initial change steps, now let's go to the next step, which is nothing but the assessment and planning phase. So here what do we do first? We take the process of risk and impact analysis. So what we'll do is we look at the RFC and say, okay, what is this actually impacting out here? Okay, is it impacting the sales system? Is it impacting the purchase system? If it is impacting, what is the risk? What is it in terms of money? What is it in terms of something else? Doesn't matter. But that type of a risk analysis has to be done. Then a technical assessment will be done. Okay, this requires this kind of resources, this requires this kind of expertise, this requires this kind of a programming skill, this requires that kind of a, you know, adding certain hardware or whatever it is. So all those features are taken care in the technical assessment. Then you actually do the planning. You plan for the build, you plan for the test, you plan for the implementation, for the remediation, for release and deployment. And here, you know, even in case there is training, etc., all those things also come into picture. And then finally you have the CAB evaluation. You know, what has the change board have actually suggested, you know, what is it that they have planned, and what kind of suggestions they have done. So you kind of look at these 4 areas as your assessment and planning phase. Now we go to the actual implementation workflow. So what happens here? You build, you coordinate change, build after the CAB approval with release and deployment management team. So this is the first thing that you need to do. Then you have to test. So this is part of the implementation workflow. We have taken care of the other things earlier, which we have already talked about. So now this is the actual building process. So now you test the product that you have tried to implement. It's not a product, it can be a service, it can be whatever it is, but there is some kind of a change that has occurred, and this has become part of the release and deployment management process. So you test it and see what is the result, you know, whether it is coming under the right types of parameters, whether the service is working as actually it is supposed to work as far as the RFC is concerned, you know, is it working, you know, is the speed good, etc., whatever, you know, all different types of things are done in the testing. And then you authorize it. So you get authorization for the test result that, yeah, everything worked. So there are a lot of people who have to sign off on this, okay, saying that, yeah, you know, I'm happy with this, I'm happy with the test results. And finally, you make the deployment. So this is the ultimate step. So this is the actual workflow of how you are going to implement the RFC. Now, change remediation is a very important thing that you need to figure about. So what happens when your changes fail, which is very common. It is not something that, you know, everything has to work, and it may work very perfectly in a test environment, and when it moves to production, there may be a change. Suddenly it may fail for whatever reason, you know, something is not configured correctly, etc., whatever. So if implementation fails, the remediation plan should restore services to previous status. So you cannot use the new change that has been implemented. That means there is something wrong. So it has to go back to the old status as it was running earlier. So immediately you have to raise an incident saying that, hey, you know, this something is wrong with this change. Then some problem record will be created because of this. Then again it goes for a change review, and the existing change record is closed. It's reviewed and closed. There is a problem. So you have to basically again work with the release and deployment, you know, management team to say that, hey, you know, whatever change we have made is not right. We need to go back and we need to figure out in the meantime what type of issue we have to solve out here. Now that we have looked for a generic change management, let us look at the standard change process, which is very simple. So here what happens is, this is something that is a pre-authorized kind of a model. So you know that there are very specific procedures which have been done before multiple times. So you follow that plan. So this is the flow chart for that. It's very simple. So you choose the change model, you assign the resources, you change the implementation, review and close the change. And you have a document wherein you have the standard change matrix document in terms of saying that, okay, you know, these are the teams available, this is the servers available, this is the, you know, inventory available in case you want to get some hardware, etc. Some standard things that can be implemented fairly quickly. So this is nothing but a standard change process. So here is the standard change workflow to give that a little bit more clarity of the diagram that you have seen earlier. You basically select pre-authorize the change model with established procedure. So there is a procedure, for example, you want to change, let's say, the way the printer is printing on a particular server, okay, which everybody is using. And unfortunately, currently the setting has been done to only print in black and white. You want to change it to allow it to change print in colors. Okay, if you have to print in colors, there are a couple of things that may happen, which is like, the cartridge has to be changed, which is allowing color printing to happen. It costs more money, but yeah, it's a very standard thing. It's okay, not a very big deal. So you pre-authorize that change model with an established procedure. So now what we are saying is that these printers are allowable for whatever color printing. As an example, it's a very simple example, but I think you get the drift of it. You assign resource for that. Hey, that's a simple thing. You have to have an engineer who goes and changes the cartridge. You have to order the cartridge, etc. Whatever, assign for that. Then you implement it, you use it, and tell everybody that, hey, it's ready to be used as a color printer from now onwards, and you can print it. Okay, so this is a standard change. It's not very complicated, but that's a very simple example that I have given. It can be a little bit more complicated, but it's something much more repeatable. That's what you have to understand. That is what more important here. So that is the standard change workflow. Now we come to the very important aspect, which is the emergency change management workflow. Now let us look at the emergency change management, which we have talked about very briefly earlier. And I would like to basically talk about three important things here. One thing is the ECAB approval, which is nothing but the emergency change advisory board giving approval. Then we talk about reduced testing. The testing is not done thoroughly here. It is just done, but not to the full extent. Because here the clear thing is that we need that problem that is there to go away. That is the most important thing. And finally, the documentation is deferred. That is, you'll take care of the documentation later. And to understand this whole emergency change management, also have a look at this process flow diagram. I would actually suggest you to pause this video, go through this entire chart out here. And one of the key things here is that it is interacting heavily with the emergency release and deployment management team, which is kind of a separate team, or it's the same team who maybe have to work maybe extra hours or whatever to ensure that the change is actually implemented. So these are some of the key performance metrics that we need to capture over a period of time. Like okay, what is the target success rate? The changes have been implemented, but after the changes have been implemented, there have been no kind of incidents. The maturity of the organization comes by having very few emergency changes. That means that there is a predictable change, but most of them are not emergencies. If there are too much emergency changes, that means that there is a severe problem with your entire process or your software or your implementation, and you need to take a serious look of it. So here the thing is that we need to have the changes to be very few. Then what is the approval time? Because this is very important. So the minute some kind of a change is submitted, RFC is submitted, and the change manager actually asks the CAB board, okay, I need this approval. How fast is it approved? Is it approved within 24 hours? What happens? So that's a very important metrics that you need to kind of want to capture so that you can improve your overall change management process. So these are the different types of measurement frameworks. So what is the efficiency metric? Change implementation time. Okay, what is the backlog reduction? Is there backlog? How well are you able to estimate, what is your estimation, and change volume trends, how many changes are there, in terms of numbers. And these are the quality metrics. Quality metrics are like, how, what happened, you made changes, but has there been any kind of a failures in those changes? How many unauthorized changes are there? What happens is sometimes you may not have the CAB available, and people take things into their own hands because of whatever pressures, and these are all unauthorized changes. And what are the remediation frequency, how is it happening? And if there are changes that are made, then how many new incidents are coming because of that changes? So these are all the quality metrics that you want to kind of find out. And then you have the value metrics. Okay, what is the benefit of this change? Can you measure that? Is there a reduction? Are you getting more money? Is there more sales or less purchases? Whatever, it can be any type of thing. What is the planned versus unplanned ratios? Some kind of ratio analysis. And how many have been accepted RFCs? How many have been rejected? And what is the impact of implementing this change to its complete completion? So these are the different types of measurement frameworks that you can kind of think about. So like we talked about, these are the three types of changes. You have the standard change, they are pre-approved, low risk, repeatable changes like password resets. They followed some kind of established procedures. Normal changes require assessment, approval, scheduling, so some patching, updates, etc. Those kind of things are all different types of normal changes. Emergency changes are something wherein there is a major incident, like there is a security patch or somebody has hacked into your system and you need to change it, and your software is basically not working, etc. Stuff like that. So these are the three types of changes that you have, and I think we have gone through them in detail. These are some of the frequently asked questions. One of the thing is what is a PIR, which is nothing but a post implementation review. So a change has been accepted, it has been implemented, and it has been deployed. So now normally what the organization has to do is they conduct what is called as a post implementation review after a change whether it has met certain deadlines, met the conditions of a success. So this need not happen after every single change. It can be something that is done on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis or however, but the quicker it is done, you will be able to add that to your database of what you have learned from this particular change, and that gets added to your knowledge base. So obviously change management it has to interact with other processes. It does integrate with incident management for root cause fixes, problem management, and also for configuration management for configuration item tracking, etc. and release management that we have been seeing consistently for deployment coordination. So there are many frequently asked questions, but I have just picked a few of them here. So who approves the changes? We have already talked about it. Standard changes are pre-approved. Normal changes go through CAB. Emergency changes may be approved by ECAB or sometimes by the change manager directly. So we have talked quite in detail about what is change management. Are you ready to optimize your ITSM? And do you know what your process gaps are in change management? If you have any questions, you can always write to us at ScrumByte. We'd be glad to open up an engagement with you or explain this much more in detail. Thank you very much for your time. This is Vijay Chandar from Scrum Byte.